Sometimes the people treated like they don't belong are the very ones who built the room everyone else is standing in. Rain slid down the tall glass windows of Ellington Prime in long silver streaks, blurring the golden lights inside until the entire restaurant looked like something floating underwater. At 8:51 p.m., the dinner rush was at its peak. Crystal glasses chimed softly beneath low jazz music. Expensive perfume drifted through the air with the smell of butter, steak, and roasted garlic. Men in tailored jackets laughed over bourbon. Women with diamond bracelets leaned close beneath warm hanging lights. Every table inside the restaurant looked polished enough to belong in a magazine. Then the front door opened, and Marcus Ellington stepped in wearing a dark charcoal coat damp from the rain, worn jeans, and an old black knit cap pulled low over his forehead. Cold wind followed him through the doorway for half a second before the hostess looked up and immediately frowned. Her smile disappeared so quickly it almost looked rehearsed. "Staff meals are over," she said without even checking the reservation screen. Marcus stopped walking. Water dripped quietly from the edge of his coat onto the polished black tile beneath him. He looked around the restaurant slowly, taking in the piano near the back wall, the amber lights hanging over the bar, the framed black and white photographs lining the hallway. His eyes paused on the piano the longest. A few nearby customers turned toward him before quickly pretending not to stare. Marcus spoke calmly. "I'm here to eat." The hostess folded her arms tighter around the tablet in her hands. "Reservations only tonight." Marcus glanced toward the dining room. At least 6 empty tables sat untouched near the windows. One waiter carrying a tray slowed down just enough to look Marcus up and down before smirking under his breath. Another customer near the entrance quietly chuckled into his wine glass. The hostess lowered her voice, but not enough. "Sir, the place across the street does take walk-ins." Marcus nodded once like he had heard worse things before in his life. Because he had. The rain outside tapped harder against the windows while the jazz piano inside drifted through the room soft and slow. Marcus removed his knit cap carefully, revealing short grey at the edges of his beard. He looked tired more than angry. Like a man carrying memories heavier than luggage. "I'll wait," he said quietly. The hostess looked uncomfortable now, not because she felt guilty, but because Marcus hadn't reacted the way she expected. No raised voice. No scene. No argument. Just stillness. She pointed toward a bench near the front windows without making eye contact. "Fine. Over there." Marcus walked toward the waiting area while conversations around him slowly restarted. But the energy had changed. A white couple near the fireplace glanced at him again before whispering to each other. One bartender behind the counter shook his head slightly as if Marcus were creating some invisible inconvenience just by existing there. Marcus sat down slowly on the leather bench. The cushion released a soft sigh beneath his weight. Through the rain-covered glass, downtown Chicago glowed red and gold from brake lights and street lamps. Across the street, steam rose from a subway grate into the freezing March air. Marcus rested his hands together quietly. His fingers were large, rough, steady. Not the hands of a man unfamiliar with work. Near the hostess stand, a young waitress named Ava watched him from a distance while balancing a tray against her shoulder. She couldn't have been older than 23. Unlike the others, she noticed something strange immediately. Marcus wasn't looking around like someone impressed by luxury. He was studying the restaurant like someone remembering it. Every few seconds his eyes returned to the piano near the back wall. The old upright piano had been restored years earlier, but Ava remembered hearing one of the older cooks say it used to belong to the original building decades ago. Marcus stared at it now with an expression too personal to explain. The hostess leaned closer to another server and whispered something that made both of them laugh quietly. Marcus heard it anyway. Probably thought this was a sports bar. Ava's smile faded. Marcus still didn't react. He simply looked down at the gold watch on his wrist. 8:54 p.m. 3 minutes had passed since he walked in. A tall white man in a navy suit suddenly emerged from the hallway near the kitchen entrance. His name tag read Ethan Cole, a general manager. He carried himself with the polished confidence of someone who enjoyed deciding who belonged and who didn't. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks while walking toward the front. The hostess immediately straightened her posture. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked. She tilted her head slightly toward Marcus sitting by the window. Ethan turned and looked. Not glanced. Judged. Marcus stood slowly as Ethan approached. The manager offered the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Good evening, sir," Ethan said smoothly. "Unfortunately, we're fully committed tonight." Marcus looked again toward the empty tables glowing beneath candlelight. "Doesn't seem that way." Ethan's expression tightened for only a second. "Those tables are reserved." "All 6? Marcus asked calmly. Ethan ignored the question. "There's a place about 2 blocks south that might fit your needs better." The wording landed exactly how Ethan intended it to. Marcus studied the manager's face carefully. Not with anger. With recognition. Like he had met this kind of man 1,000 times before. The jazz music continued drifting softly through the room while silverware clinked against plates in the distance. Nobody nearby was pretending not to listen anymore. Ethan lowered his voice slightly. "Sir, we do have a certain atmosphere we maintain here." Ava froze where she stood. Marcus looked at Ethan for a long moment, then slowly nodded once. "I see," he said quietly. And somehow those 2 words made Ethan more uncomfortable than shouting ever could. Marcus remained standing near the front window while rainwater rolled slowly from the edge of his coat onto the dark leather bench beneath him. Ethan gave the kind of tight smile people used when they wanted to appear polite without offering a single ounce of warmth. Behind him, the restaurant glowed gold and amber beneath hanging lights imported from Italy, every polished surface reflecting money, status, and carefully manufactured elegance. Marcus remembered when the building smelled different. 30 years earlier, before the marble floors and imported wine displays, the place had been an old jazz lounge with cracked booths and leaking pipes. Back then his mother used to arrive every morning before sunrise carrying a bucket, rubber gloves, and a small radio wrapped in plastic so the cleaning chemicals would not ruin it. Marcus could still remember sitting near the kitchen entrance as a child doing homework while his mother scrubbed floors long after midnight. She used to tell him something every Friday when her feet hurt too much to walk home comfortably. Never let anybody decide your worth before they know your name. At the time, he had not understood why she repeated it so often. He understood now. Ethan adjusted the sleeve of his expensive navy jacket. "I think it would be best if we avoid making the other guests uncomfortable tonight." Marcus looked at him carefully. The manager could not have been older than 38. Clean haircut. Bright white teeth. Perfect posture. Everything about him looked polished enough for corporate brochures. But Marcus had spent most of his life learning how to see past polished surfaces. Some people hid insecurity behind arrogance. Others hid cruelty behind professionalism. Ethan belonged to the second group. "Uncomfortable," Marcus repeated softly. Ethan nodded once. "This is a fine dining establishment." Marcus almost smiled at that. Almost. Somewhere near the bar, glass shattered lightly followed by nervous laughter from a server who had dropped a wine glass. The scent of seared steak drifted through the dining room while soft jazz piano rolled above quiet conversations. Outside, snow mixed with rain beneath the Chicago streetlights, turning the sidewalk silver. Marcus slipped one hand into his coat pocket slowly and felt the folded photograph he carried there every year on this date. The edges had softened from time. His mother stood in the picture wearing a cleaning apron and smiling beside the old piano near the back wall. She had taken the photo the week before she died. Marcus still remembered the exact words she told him afterward. "One day people like us should be able to walk through the front door too." Ethan noticed Marcus staring toward the piano again. "Sir, are you waiting for someone?" Marcus looked back at him. "In a way." Ethan clearly did not understand the answer, but before he could respond, Ava quietly approached holding a glass of water. "I thought maybe you might want this while you wait," she said gently. Her voice carried none of the coldness filling the rest of the room. Marcus accepted the glass carefully. "Thank you." Ava gave a small nod before Ethan turned sharply toward her. "Ava." She stiffened immediately. "Yes, sir." Ethan lowered his voice, but irritation still cut through it. "Focus on paying customers." Ava glanced toward Marcus awkwardly before stepping back toward the dining room. Marcus watched the exchange silently. Not angry. Observing. The same way he had observed people his entire life. It was why he never announced himself when visiting his businesses. People behaved honestly when they thought nobody important was watching. Near the entrance, two men in tailored suits entered laughing loudly before immediately being escorted toward a premium table beside the fireplace without reservations being mentioned once. Marcus watched Ethan personally pull out one of their chairs. The contrast did not go unnoticed by anyone paying attention. Ava noticed. The bartender noticed. Even a gray-haired woman dining alone near the windows noticed, judging by the uncomfortable expression crossing her face. Marcus checked the time again. 8:57 p.m. 6 minutes since he walked through the door. Ethan returned toward the front with controlled impatience now replacing his earlier fake warmth. "Sir, I really need to ask whether you intend to order anything tonight." Marcus lifted the water glass slowly. "I already did." Ethan exhaled sharply through his nose. "Look, I am trying to handle this respectfully." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Respectfully?" Ethan crossed his arms. "You are creating a situation." Marcus stared at him quietly for several seconds. The silence stretched long enough to make Ethan shift uncomfortably beneath it. Finally Marcus spoke. "Do you know what my mother used to do in this building?" Ethan blinked once. "Excuse me?" Marcus glanced again toward the piano. "She cleaned floors here for 18 years. Ethan gave a short, uncomfortable laugh. "Sir, this restaurant opened 11 years ago." "This version of it did," Marcus replied calmly. Something about the answer unsettled Ethan for the first time. His confidence flickered just slightly before returning. "Either way, we reserve the right to refuse service." Marcus nodded slowly as though confirming something internally. Around them, conversations lowered again. People sensed tension the way animals sense storms before they arrived. Ava stood frozen near the kitchen entrance pretending to organize menus while secretly listening. Marcus took a small sip of water. "Can I ask you something, Ethan?" The manager's eyes narrowed immediately at hearing his own name. Marcus had not looked at the name tag once. "How do you know my name?" Ethan asked. Marcus ignored the question. "When you looked at me tonight, what exactly did you see?" Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped. Because suddenly there was no safe answer. Marcus stepped closer to the front window where rain streaked down the glass behind him like moving shadows. "Did you see someone dangerous?" he asked quietly. "Someone poor? Someone who did not belong in your version of this city?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Sir, I think this conversation is over." Marcus looked around the dining room one more time. At the chandeliers. At the marble bar. At the piano his mother once dusted before opening hours every morning at 5:30. His expression softened for just a second beneath the warm amber light. Then he looked back at Ethan and spoke in the calmest voice yet. "No," Marcus said quietly. "I think it is finally starting." The air inside the restaurant felt tighter after Marcus spoke those words. Even the music seemed quieter now, the slow piano notes drifting through the dining room like something fragile hanging in the air. Ethan stared at Marcus with growing irritation, but beneath it something else had started forming too. Uncertainty. The kind people tried to hide when control began slipping through their fingers one inch at a time. Marcus picked up the glass of water Ava had given him and took another calm sip while warm candlelight reflected softly across the dark wood walls around him. He did not look like a man trying to win an argument. He looked like a man confirming a truth he had already known before walking through the door. Ethan forced a short laugh. "Sir, if you are unhappy with our policies, I can provide the number for corporate guest relations." Marcus lowered the glass slowly. "You could." Ethan gestured toward the entrance. "Then I think we are done here." Marcus glanced once more toward the piano near the back wall. A young musician sat there now playing softly for the dinner crowd, unaware that decades earlier another woman used to polish those same keys every Tuesday night after closing. Marcus remembered being 12 years old, sitting cross-legged beneath that piano while waiting for his mother to finish work. Sometimes she would hum quietly while mopping floors because she was too exhausted to sing loudly. She used to smell like lemon cleaner and cigarette smoke from the cook standing outside during breaks. Back then nobody looked at her. Workers like her moved through wealthy spaces invisible to everyone except each other. Marcus never forgot that feeling. Invisible until somebody needed something cleaned. Invisible until somebody needed dishes washed. Invisible until somebody wanted someone removed. "You know what the funny thing is?" Marcus said quietly. Ethan folded his arms. "I am sure you are going to tell me." Marcus ignored the sarcasm. "People always think dignity looks expensive." The manager gave a tired smile. "Sir, I really do not have time for this." But several nearby customers were listening openly now. One older black couple near the windows had stopped eating entirely. A businessman at the bar slowly lowered his bourbon glass. Ava remained frozen beside the service station pretending to wipe menus that had already been cleaned twice. Ethan noticed the attention and his posture stiffened immediately. Men like him hated losing control in public. "Everybody here worked hard to be here tonight," Ethan said carefully. "We maintain standards." Marcus nodded slowly. "Standards." Ethan continued, speaking more to the room now than to Marcus himself. "We cannot simply allow anyone to walk in disrupting guests." Marcus looked around the restaurant again. Expensive watches glimmered beneath warm lighting. White tablecloth sat untouched beneath crystal glasses. Servers moved carefully between tables carrying plates decorated like artwork. The entire room looked elegant. Refined. Successful. But Marcus had learned years ago that beautiful rooms often hid ugly habits. "You think I disrupted this room?" Marcus asked calmly. Ethan hesitated for half a second. "I think this conversation has become inappropriate." Marcus almost smiled again. Interesting word. The rain outside had turned heavier now, tapping steadily against the tall windows overlooking downtown Chicago. The city lights shimmered through the water like blurred gold paint. Marcus slowly removed his coat and folded it neatly over one arm. Beneath it he wore a plain dark sweater, clean but simple. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to impress strangers. Ethan noticed the old silver watch on Marcus's wrist and the scuffed leather shoes damp from rainwater. Everything about Marcus looked ordinary by the standards of the room. And that was exactly why Ethan had decided he did not belong. Near the kitchen entrance, one of the younger servers leaned toward another employee and whispered, "Why is he still here?" Marcus heard that too. He heard all of it. Years of boardrooms and business negotiations had trained him to notice every shift in tone, every nervous glance, every fake smile. Silence often revealed more than words ever could. Ava suddenly stepped forward again before she could stop herself. "There actually is an open table near the west windows," she said quietly. Ethan turned toward her immediately. "Ava." His voice sharpened enough to make her shrink back slightly. "We are handling this." Ava looked embarrassed but stood her ground. "I just thought, you thought incorrectly," Ethan interrupted. The humiliation in her eyes flashed instantly before she lowered them toward the floor. Marcus noticed that too. Good people often got punished first inside toxic environments. Ethan adjusted his tie and looked back at Marcus. "Sir, I need you to leave now." The words finally landed openly enough that nearby conversation stopped completely. Nobody pretended not to hear anymore. The older couple near the window exchanged disappointed looks. One woman near the bar shook her head softly under her breath. Marcus remained perfectly calm. "Before I go," he said quietly, "I want to ask you one final question." Ethan sighed dramatically. "Fine." Marcus looked directly into his eyes. "If I walked in here wearing a $1,000 suit tonight, would this conversation still be happening?" Ethan opened his mouth immediately. "This has nothing to do with race." Marcus never blinked. "I did not mention race." Silence hit the room like a drop plate. Ethan's face tightened instantly after realizing what he had revealed. The bartender looked away awkwardly. Ava slowly stopped moving altogether. Marcus let the silence sit there untouched for several long seconds because some truths became louder when nobody rushed to cover them. Ethan straightened his shoulders again, trying desperately to recover authority. "I think you should leave before this becomes embarrassing." Marcus looked around the room once more. At the customers. At the staff. At the chandeliers glowing softly above tables his mother would never have been allowed to sit at years earlier. Then he checked the time on his silver watch. 9 p.m. exactly. 9 minutes since he first walked through the front door. Marcus slipped his phone from his pocket slowly while Ethan watched with visible annoyance. "What are you doing?" the manager asked. Marcus unlocked the screen calmly. His reflection shimmered faintly against the rain-covered glass beside him. "Something my mother waited her entire life to see," he said softly. Marcus held the phone loosely in one hand while the entire front section of the restaurant watched him without pretending otherwise anymore. Rain slid down the towering windows behind him in silver rivers, blurring the red brake lights outside into soft streaks of color. Ethan stood with his jaw tight and shoulders squared, still, trying to project authority even as uncertainty slowly crept into his expression. "Sir," Ethan said carefully, "if you are recording employees without permission, I will have to ask you to stop immediately." Marcus looked at the screen for a moment before calmly tapping once. "I am not recording anyone." The overhead lights reflected faintly against the polished black marble floor while nearby diners exchanged whispers behind lowered wine glasses. Somewhere near the kitchen, a printer continued spitting out order tickets as if the restaurant itself had not realized something important was shifting beneath its expensive calm. Marcus lifted the phone to his ear. "Good evening, Denise," he said softly. Ethan frowned immediately. Marcus listened for a moment while everyone nearby remained frozen. "Yes," Marcus continued calmly. "I am at the Chicago location." Ethan crossed his arms tighter. "Sir, I am not going to continue allowing disruption to our guests." Marcus held up one finger politely while still listening to the voice on the phone. "No," he said quietly. "Do not notify anyone yet." Ava felt her stomach tighten hearing that sentence. Something about Marcus no longer sounded uncertain. The tone had changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed without needing to raise volume. Marcus turned slightly toward the rain-covered windows while speaking. "I wanted to see it myself first." Ethan's face hardened. "That is enough." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You need to leave now before security becomes involved." Marcus slowly lowered the phone from his ear and ended the call. Then he looked directly at Ethan again. Calm. Steady. Completely unshaken. "You know," Marcus said quietly, "my mother used to tell me something about places like this." Ethan gave a frustrated sigh. "I really do not care." "That is the problem," Marcus replied. The words landed softly, but they hit harder than anger would have. For the first time, Ethan looked less annoyed and more defensive. Marcus glanced toward the dining room again. At the polished silverware. At the servers moving carefully between tables. At the wealthy guests. Pretending not to stare while listening to every word. "She said some people become so obsessed with protecting luxury," Marcus continued, "that they forget how to recognize humanity." A silence spread slowly through the room after that sentence. The older black couple near the windows lowered their eyes quietly. One of the bartenders stopped drying glasses entirely. Ava could feel heat rising in her face because deep down she knew Marcus was right. The worst part was not that Ethan had judged him. It was how normal everyone acted afterward. Ethan forced another thin smile. "Sir, nobody is being treated unfairly." Marcus looked at him carefully. "You believe that?" "I know that." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then answer something honestly." Ethan said nothing. If a white man walked through that door tonight wearing this exact same coat, these same shoes, this same expression on his face, Marcus asked quietly, would he still be standing out here after 9 minutes? Ethan opened his mouth but no words came out immediately. Because the answer existed plainly in the room around them. Everyone knew it. Nobody wanted to say it aloud. Marcus slipped the phone back into his coat pocket. "That silence tells me enough." Ethan straightened immediately, trying to regain control before the moment slipped further away from him. "I think you are trying to create an issue where none exists." Marcus almost smiled again. "No," he said softly. "The issue existed long before I arrived." Near the hostess stand, Ava noticed something she had missed earlier. Hanging behind the reservation desk was a framed newspaper article from years ago celebrating the reopening of the building after renovation. Most guests probably walked past it every night without reading it. But now Ava found herself staring at the faded photograph beside the headline. A younger black man stood shaking hands with city officials outside the restaurant during its grand reopening. The image was small and grainy beneath glass. But the eyes were unmistakable. Ava slowly looked back toward Marcus standing near the window. Her breath caught instantly. The same eyes. The same calm expression. The same face, only older. Now. She looked at the plaque beneath the photo. Founder Investor Group led by entrepreneur Marcus Ellington. Ava felt her pulse jump hard against her ribs. Ethan was still talking, unaware. "Sir, I am going to ask one final time for you to leave peacefully." Marcus looked toward Ava for half a second. He saw immediately from her expression that she had noticed the photograph. But she stayed quiet. Marcus respected that. Some truths needed a moment before entering a room fully. Outside, thunder rolled faintly above downtown Chicago while headlights drifted through rain across the wet streets below. Inside, the restaurant remained wrapped in expensive warmth and unbearable tension. Marcus slowly walked away from Ethan toward the piano near the back wall. Several customers turned in their seats as he passed. Nobody stopped him now. The pianist looked up nervously before Marcus gently touched the edge of the polished wood. His fingertips rested there for a moment like someone greeting an old friend. "My mother used to clean this piano every Thursday night," Marcus said softly without looking back. Ethan followed several feet behind him. "Sir, you cannot just wander through the dining room." Marcus ignored him. "She believed beautiful places should belong to everybody," he continued quietly. "Not just the people wealthy enough to avoid being questioned at the door." The pianist slowly stood up from the bench, sensing the weight of the moment without understanding all of it. Marcus looked down at the piano keys glowing softly beneath the overhead lights. "She never got the chance to eat here," he said. "Not once." The room had become completely silent now except for rain tapping against glass and distant traffic humming 12 stories below. Ethan finally stepped closer again, his patience gone. "Who exactly do you think you are?" Marcus turned slowly toward him. And for the first time all night, there was something heavy behind his calm expression. Not rage. Not revenge. Disappointment. The kind that only came from loving something before watching it lose its soul. Marcus reached into his coat pocket one more time and removed a slim black card holder. Then he handed Ethan a single matte business card beneath the warm restaurant lights. Ethan took it automatically, still irritated, still confused. But the second his eyes dropped to the name printed across the card, all color quietly drained from his face. For several long seconds Ethan did not move at all. The business card remained frozen between his fingers beneath the warm overhead light while the entire restaurant watched the color slowly drain from his face. The matte black card looked simple, elegant, expensive. At the center, embossed in silver lettering, were 4 words that suddenly changed the entire atmosphere of the room. Marcus Ellington, founder and chairman. Ellington Hospitality Group. Ethan blinked once as if his brain needed extra time to process what his eyes were seeing. Then he looked up at Marcus again, this time really looking at him for the first time all night. The silence around them became almost unbearable. Even the rain outside seemed quieter now. Ava felt her chest tighten as realization spread through the dining room table by table like electricity. The older black couple near the window exchanged stunned looks. One bartender nearly dropped a glass while staring toward Marcus. The hostess at the front desk slowly stepped backward without meaning to. Ethan swallowed hard before forcing out a nervous laugh that sounded painfully unnatural. "Mr. Ellington," he said quickly, almost tripping over the name. "I did not realize," Marcus gently interrupted him. "That is the point." Ethan opened his mouth again but nothing came out immediately. Because there was nothing he could say that would erase the last 10 minutes. Marcus remained calm beside the piano, one hand resting lightly against the polished wood his mother once cleaned after midnight shifts decades earlier. His expression carried no satisfaction. No triumph. Only disappointment heavy enough to quiet an entire room. "I can explain this misunderstanding," Ethan said quickly. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Can you?" Ethan glanced around nervously now, suddenly aware that every employee and customer in the restaurant was watching him. The confidence that had filled his voice earlier had vanished completely. "We treat all guests with respect here," he said weakly. Marcus looked toward the hostess stand. "Do you?" Ethan followed his gaze and immediately saw panic spreading across the hostess's face. The young woman looked close to tears now, but Marcus noticed something important. Fear was not the same thing as accountability. Too many people only recognized cruelty after consequences arrived. Marcus slowly walked toward the center of the dining room while expensive leather shoes and polished silverware reflected softly beneath the chandelier lights around him. Nobody spoke. Nobody even reached for their food anymore. "My mother spent 18 years cleaning buildings in this city," Marcus said quietly. "Most nights people walked right past her without learning her name." His voice remained steady, but the emotion underneath it had become impossible to ignore now. "When I bought this building 11 years ago, I promised myself one thing." He looked around the room carefully. No person would ever walk through these doors and feel small because of how they looked. Ava lowered her eyes immediately. Ethan rubbed one trembling hand against his tie. "Mr. Ellington, if somebody made you uncomfortable tonight, I assure you we can address it internally." Marcus stopped walking. "Internally." He repeated the word softly like he was testing how hollow it sounded. Then he turned back toward Ethan. "Do you know what I noticed the second I walked in?" Ethan said nothing. "Nobody asked whether I had money," Marcus continued. "Nobody asked whether I belonged to a private membership. Nobody asked whether I could afford dinner." His eyes moved slowly across the staff standing frozen around the dining room. "They saw a black man in work boots and decided the answer before speaking to me." A painful silence settled over the room after that sentence. Because nobody could honestly deny it anymore. Ethan tried one last time to regain control. "This is not who we are as a company." Marcus looked directly at him. "It became exactly who you allowed it to become." The words landed heavier than shouting ever could have. Near the back wall, the pianist quietly stepped away from the instrument altogether now, sensing this moment no longer belonged to music. Marcus slowly reached into his coat pocket again and removed his phone. Ethan's breathing visibly changed the moment he saw it. Marcus unlocked the screen calmly. "For the past 7 months," he said softly, "corporate complaints from this location increased 40%. Ethan's face tightened. Marcus continued scrolling. "Guest reports mentioning profiling, selective service, and discriminatory treatment appeared repeatedly. Several employees exchanged nervous glances immediately. Ava looked stunned. Marcus looked back up. I came here tonight because I wanted to see whether the reports were exaggerated. Ethan's voice dropped lower now. Mr. Ellington, please. Marcus ignored the interruption. Instead, he continued quietly, I watched a room full of employees decide somebody did not belong before hearing his name. The rain hammered harder against the windows now while thunder rolled faintly over the city skyline outside. The warmth inside the restaurant suddenly felt artificial. Fragile. Like the entire illusion of elegance had cracked open beneath the weight of truth. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice desperately. Please let us discuss this privately. Marcus looked at him for several seconds before answering. No, the one word. Calm. Final. It stopped Ethan completely. Marcus glanced toward Ava next. You were the only person tonight who showed kindness before knowing who I was. Ava looked startled hearing him speak directly to her. I just brought water, she said softly. Marcus gave a faint nod. Exactly. That hit the room harder than everything else somehow. Because kindness should not have required courage in the first place. Marcus looked around the restaurant one final time. At the chandeliers. At the polished marble. At the expensive wine displays glowing amber beneath soft light. Then his eyes returned to the piano. My mother used to tell me something when I was young, he said quietly. She said the true character of a place is revealed by how it treats the person with the least power in the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Marcus slowly slipped his phone back into his pocket. Then he looked directly at Ethan with the same calm expression he had carried since entering the restaurant. And tonight, he said softly, this place revealed everything. No one in the restaurant seemed to remember what they were doing anymore. Half-finished glasses of wine sat untouched beneath candlelight. Steam slowly faded from expensive plates growing cold across white tablecloths. Even the kitchen noise behind the swinging doors had softened, as if the entire building itself were listening now. Marcus stood quietly near the piano with one hand resting against the smooth blackwood while rain continued whispering against the tall windows surrounding the dining room. Chicago glowed outside in blurred gold and red reflections beneath the storm. Ethan looked like a man trying to wake himself from a nightmare without knowing how. He glanced down at the business card again as though the words might somehow rearrange themselves into something less devastating. But they did not change. Founder and Chairman. Ellington Hospitality Group. The same company logo appeared on the menus, the reservation screens, the employee uniforms, even the embossed napkins folded neatly across every table in the room. Ethan had spent the entire evening trying to remove the man whose name sat printed on nearly every object surrounding him. Marcus slowly walked toward the front windows again, his shoes quiet against the polished marble floor. Nobody moved out of his way because nobody needed to be told anymore. The balance of power had already shifted completely. Ava watched him carefully from near the service station. The strangest part was not that Marcus owned the restaurant. It was that even after everything that happened, he still carried himself with gentleness. No yelling. No threats. No cruel satisfaction. Just sadness heavy enough to fill the room. Marcus stopped near the glass overlooking the rain-soaked street below. Water streamed downward in silver lines while headlights crawled through the storm beneath him. When I was 14, he said softly without turning around, my mother worked 3 jobs at the same time. His voice forced the entire room deeper into silence. Morning shifts at a hotel. Afternoon cleaning offices downtown. Then nights here until almost 2 in the morning. Ethan lowered his eyes slowly. Marcus continued speaking while staring out into the storm. Some nights I used to wait outside in the car because she was too tired to drive home safely afterward. The amber lights inside reflected faintly across the glass in front of him, surrounding his reflection like a memory. She loved this building, Marcus said quietly. Not because people treated her well. Most of them did not even notice her. He paused for a moment. She loved it because she believed beautiful places represented possibility. Ava felt tears sting unexpectedly behind her eyes. Marcus finally turned back toward the dining room. She thought maybe one day people like us would not feel invisible walking into rooms like this. Nobody could look directly at him now except Ava. The hostess stared at the floor. Several servers stood completely frozen beside tables they had forgotten to clear. One older dishwasher near the kitchen entrance quietly removed his hat and held it against his chest. Marcus noticed that too. He noticed everything. Ethan took one hesitant step forward. "Mr. Ellington," he said quietly, "I know sorry is not enough." Marcus studied him carefully. "No," he answered softly. "It is not." The honesty of the response landed harder than anger would have. Ethan swallowed visibly. "But I can fix this." Marcus glanced around the restaurant slowly. "Can you fix what your employees learned watching you?" Ethan said nothing. "Can you fix the guests who sat here tonight hearing exactly how certain people are spoken to when they are believed to have no power?" The silence stretched again. Rain rolled down the windows like moving shadows while distant thunder hummed above the city skyline. Marcus looked tired now. Not physically. Spiritually. Like a man carrying generations of disappointment too old to describe properly. "Do you know what hurts most?" he asked quietly. Nobody answered. "I built this company so workers would feel respected." He looked toward the kitchen entrance where several staff members stood nervously listening. Dishwashers. Servers. Hosts. Valets. The people wealthy customers barely look at. His eyes moved slowly across the room. "Because those were my people." Ava lowered her gaze again, overwhelmed by the weight behind those words. Marcus stepped toward the piano once more and lightly pressed one finger against a single key. A soft note echoed through the silent restaurant before fading into the rain outside. "My mother used to clean this piano every Thursday," he whispered. "She said it reminded her that elegance and kindness were supposed to belong together." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Shame had fully replaced arrogance now. But Marcus had seen enough in life to understand something important. Shame after exposure was not the same thing as integrity before consequences. Near the front entrance, the automatic doors suddenly opened as cold wind swept briefly through the restaurant. 3 people wearing dark overcoats stepped inside carrying leather portfolios and company identification badges. Every employee in the room stiffened immediately. Ethan looked toward them and his face lost what little color remained. The woman leading the group approached Marcus respectfully. "Good evening, Mr. Ellington," she said softly. "We came as soon as we received your call." Marcus nodded once. "Thank you, Denise." The woman glanced around the dining room carefully before opening her portfolio. "Corporate audit team is ready whenever you are." The words hit the room like ice water. Several employees exchanged frightened looks immediately. Ethan's breathing changed again. "Audit?" he asked weakly. Denise looked toward him calmly. "Formal ownership review and conduct investigation." Marcus finally faced Ethan completely. The warmth in his expression had disappeared now, replaced by something colder. Not hatred. Clarity. 7 months of complaints, Marcus said quietly. Tonight was simply confirmation. Ethan opened his mouth desperately. "Please, Mr. Ellington, I was trying to protect the image of the restaurant." Marcus looked directly into his eyes. "And in the process," he said softly, "you destroyed its soul." The storm outside deepened as the corporate audit team spread quietly through the restaurant with tablets and leather folders in their hands. Nobody rushed. Nobody raised their voice. That somehow made the atmosphere even heavier. Employees stood frozen near tables and service stations while customers watched in complete silence beneath the amber glow of chandeliers. Marcus remained near the piano, calm and still, while Denise spoke softly with 2 members of the audit team near the hostess stand. Every few seconds another employee tablet chimed with incoming notifications from corporate headquarters. The sound echoed sharply through the dining room like tiny alarms no one could escape. Ethan stared at the messages appearing across his own device with growing panic. Immediate suspension of managerial access. Internal conduct review initiated. Corporate oversight activated. His fingers trembled slightly holding the screen. The authority he had worn so confidently earlier that night was disappearing piece by piece in front of everyone. Marcus watched quietly. Not enjoying it. Simply witnessing it. Mr. Ellington, Denise said gently as she approached him, we have already confirmed 3 prior complaints involving selective guest treatment from this location. Ethan immediately looked up. Those reports were never substantiated. Denise turned toward him calmly. Because local management closed them internally. The sentence landed like a door shutting. Ethan opened his mouth but stopped again when he realized there was no defense left that did not sound worse than silence. Ava stood beside the service station clutching a menu tightly against her chest. Around her, several employees avoided eye contact entirely. Others looked stunned, as if they were finally seeing the environment they worked inside from outside themselves for the first time. Marcus slowly walked toward the center of the room again while rain streaked endlessly across the windows behind him. Do you know what the hardest part of success was for me? He asked quietly. Nobody answered. It was realizing money changes how people hear your voice. His eyes moved carefully across the restaurant. Tonight, before anyone knew who I was, my words carried no value here. The older black couple near the windows lowered their heads slowly. Marcus continued. The moment people discovered I owned the building, suddenly everyone listened. Ethan looked physically sick now. Mr. Ellington, he said softly, please believe me when I say I never intended. Marcus interrupted gently. Intent does not erase impact. Silence again. Deep and complete. Somewhere in the kitchen a dishwasher rack rolled loudly across tile before stopping abruptly, the sound strangely sharp in the stillness. Marcus glanced toward the young hostess near the front desk. Tears had begun forming in her eyes. What is your name? He asked softly. She swallowed hard. Lauren. Marcus nodded once. Lauren, when you looked at me tonight, what made you assume I worked in the back instead of dining here? The young woman looked down immediately. I do not know. Marcus waited patiently. Finally she whispered, you did not look like the usual guests. Marcus gave a faint sad smile. Exactly. No anger. No cruelty. Somehow that made the truth even more painful for everyone listening. Denise quietly handed Marcus a folder. He opened it slowly beneath the warm chandelier light. Inside were printed guest complaints, internal reports, screenshots from review websites, and notes from prior investigations. Marcus turned several pages carefully while the room remained silent enough to hear paper shifting between his fingers. 6 separate complaints mentioned black guests being questioned about reservations while empty tables remained available, Marcus said quietly. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Marcus looked up from the folder. 3 mentioned staff directing minority guests toward takeout recommendations instead of seating options. Ava looked shocked hearing the details spoken aloud. Marcus turned another page. 1 family reported being mistaken for delivery drivers while celebrating their daughter's medical school graduation. The shame inside the room became almost physical now. Heavy. Suffocating. Ethan rubbed one hand across his forehead. I did not personally handle all those situations. Marcus stared at him calmly. But you created the culture that allowed them. That sentence broke whatever remained of Ethan's confidence. His shoulders lowered fully for the first time all night. The image of the polished manager was gone now. In its place stood a man forced to confront what he had normalized for years. Marcus closed the folder gently. I spent 20 years building this company, he said quietly. Not just to serve expensive meals. He looked around at the glowing restaurant surrounding them. I built it to prove dignity and excellence could exist together. His eyes drifted back toward the piano again. My mother never believed wealth made people better than anyone else. She believed character did. Outside, lightning briefly flashed across the Chicago skyline, illuminating the rain-covered glass in silver light before fading again into darkness. Inside, the chandeliers seemed dimmer somehow. Smaller. Marcus looked toward Ava once more. How long have you worked here? 8 months, she answered softly. And tonight, Marcus asked gently, did you feel comfortable speaking up? Ava hesitated before finally shaking her head. No, Marcus nodded slowly, like that answer hurt him most of all. Toxic environments survived because decent people became afraid to challenge them. Denise stepped closer holding another tablet. Corporate security has completed review of the last 90 days of customer incidents, she said quietly. Ethan looked down immediately before she even continued. Multiple policy violations confirmed. Marcus remained silent for several seconds after hearing that. Rain continued sliding down the windows while distant sirens echoed faintly somewhere far below on the wet Chicago streets. Finally, Marcus looked directly at Ethan again. Do you remember what you said to me when I walked in? Ethan could barely meet his eyes now. Marcus answered for him. You said this place had a certain atmosphere to maintain. He glanced around the dining room slowly one last time. You were right. Then Marcus handed the folder back to Denise and spoke with calm finality. Effective immediately, every manager involved in discriminatory conduct at this location is terminated. Pending full investigation. Gasps spread softly through the room. Ethan stood motionless, his face completely drained beneath the warm restaurant lights. Marcus looked at him not with hatred, but with disappointment old enough to feel exhausted. You forgot something important, Marcus said quietly. Luxury without humanity is just polished emptiness. The words hung over the restaurant long after Marcus finished speaking. Luxury without humanity is just polished emptiness. Nobody in the room seemed capable of moving past them. The chandeliers still glowed softly above white tablecloths and crystal glasses, but the elegance now felt hollow somehow, stripped bare beneath the truth Marcus had forced everyone to confront. Outside the towering windows, rain continued falling over downtown Chicago in cold silver sheets while traffic lights shimmered against wet pavement below. Ethan stood motionless near the center of the dining room, no longer looking like the confident manager who had guarded the front entrance earlier that night. His tie hung slightly loose now. His shoulders looked smaller. Human. Denise quietly continued speaking with the audit team near the hostess stand while several employees checked their tablets with pale faces. Formal suspension notices had already begun arriving. Corporate interviews would begin first thing in the morning. But Marcus no longer looked interested in punishment. He looked tired. The kind of tired that came from carrying disappointment for too many years. Ava slowly approached him near the piano. Mr. Ellington, she said softly, unsure whether she should even interrupt. Marcus turned toward her gently. Yes? She hesitated before speaking again. I am sorry for what happened tonight. Marcus studied her expression for a moment and immediately understood she meant it sincerely. Thank you, he answered quietly. Ava looked down at the polished piano keys. I almost said something earlier. Marcus nodded once. Almost matters more than you think. She looked confused by the answer. Marcus gave a faint tired smile. Good people usually know when something is wrong long before they know how to stop it. Nearby, Ethan slowly stepped forward. The entire room seemed to tense again instinctively. But his voice sounded different now. Softer. Stripped of performance. Mr. Ellington, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. Marcus looked at him calmly without responding. Ethan swallowed hard. Not because you own this company. He lowered his eyes briefly. Because I treated you like you had less value before I knew who you were. The honesty in the sentence surprised even the employees standing nearby. Marcus remained silent for several seconds while rain tapped gently against the glass around them. Do you know what the dangerous part is? Marcus finally asked softly. Ethan looked up uncertainly. You are not an unusual man. That answer visibly hurt more than anger would have. Marcus continued carefully. There are thousands of people who make the same assumptions every day and never realize they are doing it. His eyes drifted across the dining room. People decide who deserves patience, who deserves kindness, who belongs in certain spaces. He glanced back toward Ethan. Most of them believe they're good people. Ethan could not answer, because deep down he knew Marcus was right. Marcus rested one hand lightly against the piano again. My mother used to come home exhausted after cleaning offices downtown, he said quietly. And sometimes she would laugh about how invisible she felt. Ava listened silently while the storm outside slowly softened into lighter rain. She told me one time that a man held the elevator door shut because he thought she was part of the cleaning equipment. Several employees lowered their eyes immediately. Marcus gave a faint sad smile. But she never became bitter. He looked toward the rain-covered windows. She used to say bitterness lets ugly people live inside your heart rent-free. For the first time all night, a few quiet smiles appeared through the heaviness in the room. Ethan looked devastated now, not because he lost authority, but because he was finally seeing himself clearly. I thought I was protecting standards, he admitted quietly. Marcus nodded slowly. I know. Ethan looked confused by the response. Marcus continued. That is how these things survive. People convince themselves they are protecting quality, safety, professionalism, image. He glanced around the luxurious dining room. When really they are just protecting comfort. The restaurant had become completely still again. Even the kitchen staff had gathered silently near the back hallway listening. Marcus looked toward Denise. Make sure the staff members who showed professionalism tonight remain employed during the transition. Denise nodded immediately. Of course. Marcus then turned toward Ava. That includes you. Ava blinked in surprise. Me. Marcus gave a small nod. Kindness under pressure tells me more about a person than experience ever could. Her eyes watered instantly. Near the kitchen entrance, the older dishwasher Marcus noticed earlier quietly wiped his face with one hand while pretending to adjust his glasses. Marcus saw that too. He saw everything. Ethan looked around the dining room slowly like he was seeing it for the first time himself now. The expensive wine displays. The glowing chandeliers. The polished marble floors. All the things he once believed created prestige. Yet somehow the simplest act of humanity in the entire building tonight had been a young waitress offering water to a stranger. Marcus checked the time on his watch. It was nearly 10 o'clock now. Almost an hour since he first walked through the front doors and was mistaken for somebody who did not belong. He slipped the silver watch gently beneath his coat sleeve again before speaking one final time to the room. This company will survive losing managers, he said quietly. But it cannot survive losing its conscience. No one moved. No one interrupted. Marcus looked toward Ethan one last time. I do not hate you, he said softly. But I hope tonight stays with you for the rest of your life. Ethan lowered his head completely after that. Not out of fear anymore. Out of shame. Marcus turned toward the front entrance while Denise and the audit team quietly continued their work behind him. Ava instinctively stepped aside to open the door before he reached it. Cold night air drifted briefly into the warm restaurant carrying the scent of rain and wet pavement. Marcus paused beside her for half a second. Take care of this place, he said gently. Ava nodded immediately. I will. Marcus gave one final glance toward the piano near the back wall where his mother's reflection seemed to linger somewhere inside memory and light. Then he stepped out into the Chicago rain without another word. By morning the rain had stopped. Chicago looked washed clean beneath pale sunlight spreading slowly across glass towers and wet streets downtown. Thin clouds drifted above the city while the sidewalks below still carried silver reflections from the storm that had covered the night before. At exactly 6:15 a.m., Ava stood outside the restaurant holding a fresh cup of coffee between cold hands as workers quietly removed the old management signage from inside the building. The gold lettering on the front windows still read Ellington Prime, but something about the place already felt different. Lighter somehow. Honest. Through the glass she could see maintenance crews polishing floors while members of the corporate audit team reviewed files near the hostess stand. Nobody laughed loudly anymore. Nobody moved with artificial confidence. The building felt quieter in a way Ava could not explain. Like the walls themselves had finally exhaled. She glanced across the street and noticed an older man walking a golden retriever through the damp morning air. Delivery trucks rolled slowly along the avenue while steam rose from subway grates into the cold spring morning. Life in the city continued exactly as it always had. But inside Ava, something had changed forever. She remembered the moment Marcus first walked through the front door the night before. The wet coat. The tired eyes. The way everyone decided who he was before learning his name. She remembered how easy it had been for people to dismiss him when they believed he had no status. And she remembered how calm he stayed through all of it. That part stayed with her most. Not the power. Not the reveal. The dignity. The front doors unlocked automatically behind her with a soft click. Ava stepped inside slowly as warm air carrying the smell of fresh coffee and polished wood wrapped around her. The chandeliers still glowed softly overhead, reflecting against the marble floor beneath early morning light. Near the piano, she noticed something new immediately. A small bronze plaque had been placed beside the polished black instrument overnight. Ava walked closer until she could read the engraving clearly. In honor of Lorraine Ellington, who believed every person deserved to walk through the front door with dignity. Ava stared at the plaque quietly for several seconds while sunlight touched the piano keys in soft golden lines. She imagined Marcus's mother standing there decades earlier with cleaning gloves on her hands, unseen by wealthy guests passing beside her without a second glance. Yet somehow her son had returned years later and changed the entire building without becoming cruel himself. Ava heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Denise approaching with a folder tucked beneath one arm. "Good morning," Denise said gently. Ava nodded. "Morning." Denise glanced toward the plaque beside the piano and smiled softly. "Mr. Ellington requested that before sunrise." Ava looked down again. "Did he leave already?" Denise nodded once. "Around for this morning." Ava seemed surprised. "He stayed all night." "Most of it," Denise answered quietly. "Reviewing employee records personally." Ava looked confused. "Personally?" Denise smiled faintly. "Marcus remembers what it feels like to work jobs where nobody important knows your name." The word settled softly into the room between them. Denise opened the folder in her hands. "Several employees were retained after review," she explained. "Including you." Ava blinked quickly. "Thank you." Denise shook her head gently. "Thank him." Near the kitchen entrance, the older dishwasher Marcus had noticed the night before slowly walked into the dining room wearing a fresh white apron. When he saw the plaque beside the piano, he stopped completely still. Then he quietly removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with one rough hand before continuing toward the kitchen without saying a word. Ava watched him disappear behind the swinging doors while emotion tightened unexpectedly in her chest again. It was strange how a single act of respect could make people feel visible after years of being overlooked. Denise handed Ava a folded piece of paper. "Marcus asked me to give you this." Ava opened it carefully. The handwriting was simple and neat. "Kindness does not become valuable after power recognizes it." It was already valuable before anyone noticed. Ava stared at the note silently while morning sunlight slowly spread farther across the restaurant floor. Outside the windows, the city brightened minute by minute beneath the clearing sky. "He really wrote this?" she asked softly. Denise smiled. Around 3:30 in the morning while drinking terrible coffee in the office upstairs. Ava laughed quietly through watery eyes. The sound felt small but genuine inside the newly quiet restaurant. Denise glanced toward the front entrance where workers were now installing a new framed statement beside the host stand. Ava walked over slowly to read it. Every guest who walks through these doors deserves respect before recognition. She stood there for a long moment watching employees pass by the sign one after another. Some slowed down to read it carefully. Others lowered their eyes afterward like they understood something painful too late. But at least now they understood. Near the front windows, early sunlight broke fully through the clouds and spilled golden light across the marble floor where Marcus had stood the night before while rain covered the city outside. Ava could still hear his voice in her mind. Luxury without humanity is just polished emptiness. She looked around the restaurant one final time. At the piano. At the glowing chandeliers. At the fresh morning light resting gently against polished wood and glass. The building looked almost exactly the same as it had 24 hours earlier. But somehow it finally felt like the kind of place Lorraine Ellington once dreamed her son might create. Outside, traffic moved steadily through downtown Chicago beneath clear skies returning after the storm. And inside the restaurant, for the first time in years, the front door no longer felt heavier for some people than others.